Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. Fun show today. Shocking breach of protocol. Normally, Jeff Sentell, exclusively a Friday guest here on our program, but today he makes a rare Wednesday appearance. Why is that? Well, part of that's because there's been so much going on with UGA recruiting as of late, and so much anticipated to be going on in the future. We're going to meticulously cover the movement of these players here over the course of the next few days, and Jeff Sentell gives us a chance to do all of that here today. So we'll talk to him about the Dylan Riley stuff, a couple of additions to Georgia's 2024 defensive line class, and the most important question of all is what might be coming next. We'll do all of that with Jeff Sentell today. And I believe I may have an opinion that may surprise some of you related to the Jim Harbaugh stuff that has kind of gotten some news over the course of the last couple of days. I believe my opinion's right. I'm going to try to explain why I believe that all Georgia fans should view it this way, and y'all can judge me to see how well that I do. So what do you say we start with that today? We are so happy to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
A good number of the people who watch this show are younger than me. And when you're kind of from like a different generation, I think your ability to sort of understand certain things is kind of obscured a little bit. Let me give you an example. This is sort of a weird thing to start with, but I'll tell you how this gets to Georgia football in a moment. Like, think about Mike Tyson. Do you know who Mike Tyson is, the boxer? Now, if you're young, if you have any kind of like awareness of Tyson, in his sort of late stage of his, I guess, life as a public figure, he's kind of a funny, cartoonish type person. You know, if you want to go back like 20 years or so ago, or 15, however long it's been, when he was in the Hangover movie, that was really funny. And ever since then, he's kind of been this sort of cartoonish, funny figure that if he's ever on TV for anything, it's usually some sort of joke or something like that. And that's kind of what Mike Tyson has been. But for people who are my age, you want to go back to like when I was a kid in the 80s, even into the 90s, Mike Tyson was not a joke. Mike Tyson was nothing to laugh at whatsoever. He'd come to the ring as a boxer with a towel cut with a hole cut in the center of it. That was his version of like sort of pre-fight attire. He had the boxing boots on with no socks. He was literally the thing that he was often called the baddest man on the planet. That's how Mike Tyson was sort of referred to. That's how he was sort of thought to be. And this, by the way, was true whether Mike Tyson was the boxing champion or not. A lot of you know that at one point in time, Tyson got beat by Buster Douglas. And after that, he had some obviously issues with his personal life and things like that, which, are worth noting as a part of his biography, but not really a part of this conversation right now. So after losing to Buster Douglas, Tyson kind of bounced around here and there. But anytime that he fought, you were fighting the baddest man on the planet. So Buster Douglas may have been the champion. Evander Holyfield may have been the champion, but Tyson still sort of was like, I guess, the people's champ in some respects. He was the most credible fighter for you to beat if you were a boxer. The biggest win you could ever get was a win against Mike Tyson, no matter who the boxing champion might have been. That's just the level of cultural relevance that a guy like Mike Tyson had for people of my era. And if you're a little younger than that, I think it may be kind of harder to appreciate that. Now, what does any of this have to do with college football? I think there's been a version of this going on in college football for a good number of years as well, where, look, in any given year, the national champion may be this team, maybe that team, but it's pretty clear, and it pains me to admit this, but it is just true, it's pretty clear to admit who the kind of baddest team on the planet has been. College football's version of what Mike Tyson used to be. It has been Alabama. There is a reason why beat Bama, we want Bama. There's a reason why we want Bama has been a meme. You don't just see it with college football teams. You see it with outside of the sport of football. Teams all over the world kind of, we want Bama. The fans will hold up that sign because it's sort of an example of, hey, this is the biggest win you could earn. And when you think your team is ready to take on Bama, that's the kind of sign you hold up. We want Bama. That's just kind of what college football has been, that LSU may have been the national champion, or Clemson may have been the national champion, or if you want to go back years ago, when Ohio State won in 2014 or something like that, there may be various national champions over the course of the last few years, but the biggest win you could earn has been against Alabama. They are viewed to be the baddest team in college football, whether they're the actual national champion or not. I don't like to admit that as a Georgia fan and someone who likes to kind of, poke fun at Alabama from time to time and Nick Saban, but it has been true. However, the point that I think we've been trying to make a little bit over the course of this offseason is, while maybe that's been true in the past, it may be time for some of that to change now. And the whole idea of, we want Bama, that sign that fans hold up, maybe that's a little bit more of a relic of the past than it should be some sort of example here in the present of what the actual conversation in college football is supposed to be. That's why on yesterday's show we spent so much time talking about Kirk Herbstreit, who's kind of made his appearances, on various shows over the course of this offseason, poorly informed. He says he hasn't really started diving into the college football content, so much yet. Not really quite so sure what he's waiting for. It is, after all, his profession. But nonetheless, he's, going around and he's doing these various shows, including Pat McAfee. We played that audio for you yesterday. And, Kirk Herbstreit still sort of falling back on that old trope of Alabama's the baddest team on the planet. And Georgia may have won the last 2 national championships, but it's Alabama who's still the team that has the most credibility in college football. And at one point in time, that was definitely true. But this isn't the same college football that it was just a few years ago. There are years in which Alabama has not won the national championship, but what you have seen in college football over the course of the last 24 months is that Georgia has won them both. This isn't the situation like it was in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, when Clemson and Bama were trading championships back and forth. No, this is Georgia winning 2 straight, something that has not been done at all in the college football playoff era. To me, it represents, and I think to most of you there as well, it represents a real sea change in the sport, that the idea of we want Bama is the kind of thing we used to do back in the old days, but the current present tense of college football looks far different. Now, all of that is a setup to say this. There was a story this week that kind of got a lot of attention, and I think in some respects, Georgia fans have kind of had, and at least in some respects, and you can judge me if I'm right about this or not, I think that some Georgia fans have had the wrong reaction to something that's been in the news this week. And I want to show you this, I'll show you this on the screen if you're watching on video, a tweet referencing a comment in a recent podcast that got a lot of attention about something that Jim Harbaugh and Michigan plan on doing this summer, and I guess throughout the college football season there as well. Do we have this tweet here? So Brian Fisher quotes Bruce Feldman, who goes on a NFL Network, NFL.com podcast. And Feldman on this podcast says that Michigan this year plans to, in addition to having what they call a beat Ohio State team period, a portion during practice, they're focused on being the best they can be in order to beat Ohio State, their hated rival. In addition to doing that, Brian Fisher says that Bruce Feldman says that Michigan also wants to do a, quote, beat Georgia period too. And a lot of Georgia fans have a big reaction to this. And Jim Harbaugh is one of those sort of corny guys that sort of elicits a big reaction. And a lot of Georgia fans, I think, would rightly say, who is Michigan to say they want to beat Georgia? Because we saw these two teams playing 2 years ago, and Georgia dragged Michigan up and down that Orange Bowl field. And last year, Michigan couldn't even qualify for the chance to play Georgia because the team they lost to Georgia 65-7. So in the eyes of many Georgia fans, and as I said before, I do sort of get where this is coming from. In the eyes of many Georgia fans, the notion that that Michigan would now say, we're going to beat Georgia, we're going to go out there, we're going to beat Georgia, that just seems really presumptuous. That just seems really much an example of kind of putting the cart before the horse of, are you really sure you even want to be on the same field as Georgia, given how the last 2 years have worked out? Are you sure you want to beat Georgia? Should you even have the word Georgia in your mouth right now, just given the way it looked the last time your team played Georgia 2 years ago? And on one hand, I sort of understand this a little bit. There's also the thing of the fact that some of this kind of falls into the whole conversation about, what Georgia's supposed to be here in 2023. And as we've kind of pointed out and chronicled over the course of the offseason, some of the prominent voices in this sport have kind of made a case for someone other than Georgia winning the national championship. Kirk Herbstreit, we highlighted, yesterday. Reese Davis is a guy who's gone on podcasts, thus far this offseason, including his own ESPN shows, making the case for this same Michigan team to be number one and not Georgia. And so when Jim Harbaugh kind of is out there with his beat Georgia period. For some Georgia fans, this kind of cycles into that whole, well, gosh, who are all these teams that or who are all these folks in college football, including apparently Michigan's Jim Harbaugh, who thinks Georgia is beatable, who thinks that Georgia's going to cede its spot at the top of college football and make way for somebody else to win the national championship, Reese Davis included. In fact, let me let you hear a little bit of Reese Davis this offseason, talking about Georgia trying to three-peat and the idea that a team like Michigan could actually be number one in the country. Here's Reese Davis.
They're the most dominant program, and certainly the most dominant team in the country, Scott. I mean, that was as brilliant and nearly perfect a performance as you'll see on a championship stage. And since you were counting up the touchdowns, I'll tell you what happened just behind the camera that I'm looking into right now about 5 minutes ago. Kirby Smart ran by. There was a pack of dog fans up there still woofing and barking, and Kirby put up one finger, and then he put up two fingers, and then he put up three fingers, and they liked that result. So now I tried to get him on the stage to say, hey, we'll see you in Houston next year. He wouldn't go for that, but when he thought nobody was looking, he's ready to count up another one. But it was just a remarkable performance, and they are the standard in the sport.
So I'll be total confession here for a minute. That's actually not the clip that I meant to play. But nonetheless, Reese Davis there was laughing about the idea that Kirby Smart wants to win 3 straight, wants to do all this kind of stuff. And yet the clip that I meant to play, I just forgot to send it the right way. But nonetheless, the clip that I meant to play later on in this offseason, Reese Davis was on some other show somewhere else saying he was going to rank Michigan as his preseason number 1 team. And so for a lot of Georgia fans, when you hear Jim Harbaugh saying he wants to beat Michigan, it kind of ties back, or I should say Jim Harbaugh saying he wants to beat Georgia, it sort of ties back into, the whole notion of, well, who are all these folks out there, apparently Jim Harbaugh included, who thinks that Georgia's beatable? But to kind of, I guess, put a bow on all this, as I said before, I think a lot of Georgia fans sort of get this wrong a little bit, or maybe even some of the other observers of college football have sort of gotten this wrong a little bit in the fact that actually in this case, if what Bruce Feldman says Jim Harbaugh wants to do is, the actual truth, and we have no reason to think it's not, I think that Jim Harbaugh is actually showing the proper amount of respect to Georgia. Because to go back to the thing we said to start the program today, there was a time when the college football meme of the highest, thing you could aspire to in college football is we want Bama. There was a time in which Bama was the baddest team on the planet, and we want Bama was your signal that you were ready to kind of step up and play at the highest level possible. Well, that's kind of passé now. That's sort of past tense now. That's sort of, a bygone era now because Georgia has won the last 2 national championships. So when Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, its coach, at practice steps up to say, hey, we're going to practice so hard with the idea of beating Georgia in mind. Whether Michigan's truly capable or not of doing that, we believe they're not. But whether they're truly capable or not of doing that, the idea they're setting their sights on Georgia is, to me, the thing we've been asking for all offseason long. That if you want to make the case for another team, you can. If you want to show some interest in another team, you can. Whether it be an SEC rival like an LSU or an Alabama, or a Big Ten foe like a Michigan or an Ohio State, if you want to talk about someone else and their possibility of contending and competing this year, obviously those opinions are all fair game. But if you want to be logically consistent, if you want to be intellectually honest, you have to start from the position of acknowledging Georgia. And the Roman Reigns reference I've used before, his catchphrase of acknowledge me, that if you want to talk about Michigan, you can do it, but acknowledge Georgia first. I know they won the last 2 national championships, but ... Ohio State, hey, they came pretty close a year ago. Georgia still won the game. Georgia's also won the last 2 national championships, ... That you can talk about anybody you want to, but you've got to acknowledge Georgia first. That's the thing we've been saying all offseason long. Well, in this particular case, that's kind of what Jim Harbaugh is doing. He's saying, hey, if we want to be the best, we got to set our sights on the best. The best is Georgia. Now, deep down, we think if those 2 teams were to play again, the result would look a lot like it did in 2021, with Michigan having a very hard time keeping up on either side of the ball at any point during the game. We think that's the way it's going to work out. But Harbaugh's quote-unquote beat Georgia period here at practice, to us, that sort of kind of represents what college football should be right now. That if you have any aspiration of being the best, you need to acknowledge the best. And the best is Georgia. So the idea that a team like Michigan wants to beat Georgia, if you're a Georgia fan, you better get used to that. The attention you get after 2 straight national championships makes you the top dog. It makes you the baddest team on the planet. And anybody who wants to be where you are has to go through you first, and good luck doing that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Breda Pest Manager. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. But especially for our folks who join us on DawgNation.com or the DawgNation app. Those are our own platforms. Especially for those of us who join us there, we start even earlier, 9:45 for our 1st and 15. They're on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We do that for you each and every day there. We also join you on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref and as a podcast. Apple, Spotify, everything else in between. We're just so happy to have you as a part of our program and so thankful for our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. And we love having them as part of our show because they are the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And that's just kind of cool, right? You know, they take care of all of those UGA athletic facilities, whether it be Sanford Stadium or one of the other spots. They're protecting it from bugs and critters, and they're keeping the termites away, and they want to do the same thing for you there, too. That's right. You can lean on and trust the same level of expertise and legacy that UGA trusts for its own pest control provisions. You can get that in your own home there as well by making the switch to Breda Pest Management right now. And here's the deal. The benefit that you get from doing that is maybe the thing that probably matters to most of us more than anything else right now. With everything seemingly getting more expensive, if you want your cost of service to go down, if you want to put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch, the time now is to do that with our friends at Breda Pest Management. They've been in business since 1975, got 125 employees, and that level of success that kind of has been, proven out over the course of a generation, that level of success gives them leverage to provide you the benefit of more money back in your pocket. That's why I wouldn't hesitate to make that switch. So go to the website. It's BredaPest.com. And let me spell this for you. You've heard me say it before. B-R-E-D-A. That's B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com. Find out why UGA trusts Breda Pest Management as their official pest control provider and why they ought to be your official pest control provider there as well. And get the benefit of more money back in your pocket for making that switch. Find them online, BredaPest.com today. All right, so we have got a lot to do on today's show. Speaking of potential teams with sort of a mindset of beat Georgia, we're going to talk about one of those here a little bit later on and some positive praise this team is getting ahead of the upcoming season. How much should Georgia fans be aware of this? We'll talk about that here coming up in a little bit. We'll also talk to Jeff Sentell here in a couple of minutes there as well. That is not typically a Wednesday thing for us. Shocking breach of typical protocol here. But nonetheless, I was gone for a couple of days. We did not have live shows for a couple of days. So it's always important to kind of catch up when you get back on the things that have been going on. And right now for us, that means UGA recruiting. So Jeff Sentell to help us do that here in a little bit. We'll talk about, a good number of issues, including what's next for Georgia recruiting as this busy summer rolls on. But as a lead into that, let's go around the Dawghouse here right now today and kind of preview a little bit of the conversation with Jeff Sentell here in a moment, looking back on some of the stuff that happened last week while I was gone. Meant to kind of get some of this yesterday. Just didn't quite have time to, but Georgia did add two big commitments to its defensive line class. In fact, let's show you those here right now. Let me show you this graphic on the screen here. Kind of nice announcement for both these guys. Quintavious Johnson joining in the class and Nnamdi Agboko. I apologize for that mispronunciation there. But Georgia going out and adding a couple of big defensive linemen to future class here. And in the case of Agboko, you're talking about a 6'4", 335-pound guy here right now. That's exactly what you're looking to see. Look, one of the most important things when it comes to what has made Georgia is that ability to kind of take away the opponent running. And we talked about this before. That's kind of one of the hallmarks of Kirby Smart. It's one of the things that has made him what he is, made the Georgia defense what it is that before the fight even begins, Georgia kind of finds a way to take out its opponent, one of its opponent's knees, one of its legs. If man can't stand, he can't fight. Well, the football version of that is that if you can't run the football, if we take that away from you either before the game even begins because you don't even try to run the ball, or during the game you're not effective running the ball because of the space that exists in front of that defensive line of scrimmage, then the idea of stopping the passing game, which is a lot of what college football has become here in 2023, the idea of stopping the passing game then becomes much easier because of how one-dimensional you have forced your opponent to be. It's obviously the big space-eating defensive linemen that give you a chance to do that. And that's clearly what Georgia's kind of chasing down and adding right now. We've talked before about the impact that Trey Scott has had on the Georgia recruiting efforts, and that obviously continued a little bit here over the course of the last week as Georgia kind of sprinkles in those names. In some cases, talking about three-star guys and things like that. But when you look at the overall success that Georgia has had, very few programs have recruited more former 4- and 5-star recruits than what Georgia has brought in. But when Georgia has chosen to identify one of those 3-star names, oftentimes these become diamond-in-the-rough type players. After all, the gold standard for that along the defensive line is Jordan Davis, someone that Georgia recognized. A lot of folks kind of thought Davis would be an offensive lineman, but Georgia saw the athleticism necessary to be a defensive lineman. They saw the imagination of what he could be slimmed down, not quite as heavy as he originally had been, and what he could turn into in a Georgia uniform. And obviously the results spoke for itself. An Outland Trophy winner, a Nagurski Award winner, truly one of the best players in the country and one of the most dynamic Georgia players over the course of this 2-year run of national championships. That's the kind of thing that Georgia's identified along the defensive line, and that's obviously the blueprint this program has in place as it looks to add more guys and to future Georgia teams. They are so busy on the recruiting trail over the course of the last couple of days. I want to make sure we took a minute to sort of mention that there around the Dawghouse here today. So that is around the Dawghouse. This is DawgNation Daily presented by Breda Pest Management. Very happy to have Jeff Sentell getting ready to make a Wednesday appearance here with us because we did some of the Dylan Raiola Buford stuff with Connor Riley yesterday. I know that Jeff Sentell was on video talking about this himself a few days ago. Want to do some more of that here today from Jeff's perspective, specifically what Raiola means here to Georgia here this year, but also what Georgia has added to this defensive line class. And with all eyes kind of being set here as you kind of turn into a July situation where a lot of the official visits have been taking place, and a lot of the stuff that's been kind of going down there, what does this start to show up and look like in terms of some of the big anticipated commitment announcements, some of the things that are expected to go down with all of that? Jeff Sentell going to give us a lot of information on that here today, as we kind of expected this summertime to be as busy and as fruitful as it sort of turned out to be. Obviously, the official visits were, every bit what they were kind of thought to be. And now you sort of set up to do now a series of time here in July, moving into August, when all of these senior seasons get ready to begin, where obviously all of that gets ready to go down. And we're obviously watching that very closely. So Jeff Sentell on all of that today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Now, I will tell you that we've had a little bit of trouble getting Jeff on the phone, but Jeff, I think, is going to be I was tap dancing there for a minute in the hopes that Jeff would be ready. But we're going to get Jeff up and rolling here and get ready to have some fun with all of that. And by the way, when we're done today, we'll do an R.S. Andrews cool down. We went long yesterday because normally we have like the live comments and the things like that, but when we're not here, when we're pre-recorded, we don't have the opportunity to be able to do that. So yesterday, I wanted to try to make good to folks. We were on the air and did live comments until about 10 till noon. That was probably as long as we've ever gone. So we'll have another kind of full day of commentary from you on the Facebook and the YouTube and all that kind of stuff. We'll do that here in just a little bit. All right, so Jeff has asked for 5 minutes, and we'll give that to him. Let me, as a kind of a precursor to all of that, before we bring on Jeff Sentell, speaking of commentary, I'll take some of your comments here right now. Jeff will be ready to go after that, and we'll have a good time. So it's unusual for us to have Jeff Sentell on a Wednesday. It's also unusual for us to take comments here during the middle of the broadcast. But we'll do all those things today because you know what? It's summertime. We're relaxed, and we're having a good time. Hemingway asking about when the summer-fall camp's going to start for Georgia. Look right there at the very beginning of August, somewhere around the 2nd or 3rd, something like that. That's right when I think you can expect Georgia to kind of officially kind of begin those practices and officially get rolling with the upcoming season. We're also only a couple of weeks away from SEC Media Days at events in Nashville this year. So if you're thinking about those next big dates for Georgia football, SEC Media Day is going to be a big one of those. Some interesting questions likely to come out of that. How healthy the Georgia running backs, the kind of outlook for this team in terms of a little bit of a changeover of the offensive personnel, new offensive coordinator. Georgia a little deeper than it's been at the wide receiver position. A guy like Darnell Washington no longer here. Does that kind of lead to a little bit of a personnel switch for Georgia? I think you're going to be talking a lot about that at SEC Media Days. There's still some open questions as it relates to some of the stuff with the Georgia secondary. A starter opposite Kamari Laster at cornerback's obviously a big part of that. Javon Bullard, the permanent move to safety, that'll be one of those questions that kind of comes up at SEC Media Days. The health of Smile Mondin, I think, and some of the other injured players will probably be chatted about there a little bit. So prior to the beginning of Georgia camp there at the beginning of August, you've also got in a couple of weeks SEC Media Days where kind of officially, on the stage facing some questions about the upcoming season, those will be some of the things that kind of come up there at that particular time. And it'll also be interesting to see who Georgia selects. Typically, SEC teams take 3 players with them for this. I think it's fairly easy to assume that Cedric Von Granger will probably be one of Georgia's guys. If I had to guess, that'll be the case. You might, if I had to guess, say Brock Bowers will be the other. The third for me might be up in the air just a little bit. Could be a Javon Dumas-Johnson. It could be a Javon Bullard. So it'll also be somewhat interesting to see the 3 players that Georgia selects to go with it to SEC Media Days there as well. We'll get a few more comments here, too. And if you're just joining us, so we're going to talk to Jeff Sentell in just a minute. Jeff making a Wednesday appearance with us. We want to get an update on UGA recruiting just because of all the stuff that's been going on. And Jeff needed a couple more minutes here, so we're going to let him do that. And then we'll talk some Georgia recruiting with him. But we're talking to you right now as we give Jeff some time to get ready to join us. Jordan Harris says, can you ask Jeff about the offensive lineman committing on Friday? So we'll talk some offensive line stuff there with Jeff Sentell. We absolutely will do that, Jordan. Absolutely will. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson also wants to know if Georgia's going to bring in 3 running backs this year. So I'll try to squeeze all that in if we possibly can. Paul Moon wants a Dog Nation invasion for Dylan Rilo's first game there at Buford. Paul, I like the idea of that. That's pretty fun. Let's see what else. Scrolling through YouTube, see what else is kind of going on here. Crow-King 123 wants Javon Bullard to be there at SEC Media Days, and I certainly think that Crow-King Javon became a very effective spokesman for Georgia because he did a lot of the podium stuff in last year's, college football playoff. He's MVPs of these games, and so he ended up speaking on behalf of Georgia a lot there. And so his emergence as a kind of a top player on this Georgia team, I think, gave him a chance to have a pretty big, vocal leadership role for Georgia a year ago. And I'm like you, I sort of expect that to continue here this year there as well, with the likelihood that maybe, no longer that nickelback star position, maybe more like a safety position. And when you start think about, I guess, also a sophomore guy like Malachi Starks, it's another guy. I don't know you quite take him to SEC Media Days yet, but that's certainly the kind of guy that you feel pretty comfortable speaking on behalf of your team. Starks Bullard together as a tandem of safeties, that's, really pretty impressive for sure. Let's see what else is going on here on YouTube today. I guess there's like a Tennessee fan in the comment section, whatever. Memphis Dog, who certainly knows these Tennessee fans pretty well, says that the Tennessee fans could have saved a lot of money if they just thrown the mustard bottles into the Tennessee River instead of the goalpost. Yeah, I will never understand that. Of all the things we've seen in the SEC over the course of the last however many years. I mean, listen, I don't mind telling you that Tennessee-Alabama game a year ago was thrilling, right? Georgia's playing whoever that day. I don't even remember. Like, Georgia fans were way more interested in Tennessee-Bama than they were the Georgia game that day because Georgia was beating everybody by 1,000 points. It was a thrilling game. It was a good win for Tennessee. I mean, I do get the idea when you haven't beaten your hated rival in that long of a span of time, that's a big win. I get all of that. And then Tennessee fans, as a way of celebrating it, tore down their goalpost, marched the goalpost to the Tennessee River, and just dumped it in the river. Like, how does pollution celebrate a football win? That doesn't make any sense. What's the one thing that people know about Knoxville? What is the one thing that Knoxville seemed to have going for it, other than like that 82 World's Fair, that little sphere thing, tower thing? The only other thing anybody knows about Knoxville is the Tennessee River. And, you intentionally polluted your own river? That didn't make any sense to me. That's sort of like the Lorraine Bracco line from Goodfellas. They spit on their own floor. I never understood that. This is Tennessee spitting on its own floor. I don't understand why you dump the goalpost into your river as a way of celebrating the win against Alabama. That never made any sense to me. Never made any sense to me. DMart42 says maybe Kamari Laster could go to SEC Media Days. I've heard he's really emerging as a leader. I think that's also a pretty good name there as well. And if you hadn't, I think Connor also wrote about this the other day. If you had me write down a list of a couple of names, and it can't be the whole team, otherwise it wouldn't be worth the conversation. But a couple of names of guys who may be really famous at the end of the year, who are for Georgia right now kind of not quite so famous. Kamari Laster would be one of my top names. He really would be. Kirby's Belt, by the way, said he had to turn the Tennessee-Bama game off a year ago. It looked like a Pac-12 shootout with terrible tackling. I love the idea that Georgia fans are morally opposed to a game that has no defense whatsoever. That's pretty good stuff. Let's see what else. John Hendricks says Brock Bowers should be going to SEC Media Days for sure. Yeah, that may be the easiest one to kind of assume there, just because, I said this last week, I really do think there's a chance Brock Bowers win the Heisman Trophy this year. And I know it seems outrageous that a tight end can win it. We haven't seen that since 1949. And, Bowers is a little bit mild-mannered in comparison to some guys. But I think that all SEC teams have a little bit of an obligation. If some players are just very shy, they don't like speaking to the media, and so I get the idea you want to try to help them out when you can. And for something like SEC Media Days, it takes a certain personality type to be able to kind of tolerate the level of microphones and cameras that are sort of stuck in your face. I do get that. But if you can send your best player, then I think you really probably should. And Brock Bowers right now is obviously Georgia's best player, so I hope that he is there. Wally Smith says, when is SEC Media Day? It's like middle of July. I forget the exact dates, but it's like middle of July. It's a couple of weeks away. All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment, and then Kaylee Manziel, who's producing for us, you want to check with Jeff to see if he might be about ready to go, and then we'll bring him on if he is. If not, we'll just sit here and take comments, because honestly, this is kind of fun for me too. We'll just roll the punches, and we'll just sort of do whatever on a day like this. Over here on Facebook for a moment. Hope y'all are over here behaving. Some of y'all don't expect me to be in this comment section during the show, so y'all may be over here, acting the fool. Hopefully you're not doing that. Rhodey Williams, thank you. The official dates for SEC Media Days, July 17th to the 20th. Rhodey, thank you very much. In Nashville this year, by the way. Earl Smith checking in to say good morning. Appreciate that. Let's see what else is going on over here. William Camacho says that Javon Bullard is a beast and will be the leader on defense. No doubt that is true. True, absolutely, for sure. I expect Bullard to have a very good year for Georgia. Kevin Cook, a little bit of a viewer request here, wants Jeff to have a longer Q&A portion on his Wednesday night show. That is a good idea. Now, I will say, much like I want people to acknowledge, Georgia, you can talk about somebody else, but acknowledge Georgia. This is one of those things where I think folks need to acknowledge me here. Like, no one, on the entire DawgNation team, of all of our successful broadcasting programs, no one has a better reputation being more interactive and more willing to, kind of converse with our live audience than I do. So should Jeff Sentell follow in our footsteps and do more of that in his own show? I think that's probably a good idea. Let's see what else. Eric Ray asking, can we get Ryan Wingo or Mike Matthews? We've obviously talked to Jeff Sentell about both those guys a good bit as of late. It seems like the Wingo thing might be a little bit more realistic than the Matthews thing right now. And we'll just sort of have to see how realistic the Wingo thing really is. Obviously, we kind of, led to believe that Jeremiah Smith has sort of reaffirmed his pledge at Ohio State enough now that we know that's real. And so you sort of set your sights on Wingo possibly as the big wide. If you're going to bring in the big wide receiver name, that seems like the most likely to be able to do that. Ryan Walker, who we always love, says Kamari Lassiter is very similar in his playing style. I want to compare him to the legendary Hall of Fame cornerback Aeneas Williams. Very interesting comparison by Ryan, who certainly knows his stuff from a football standpoint. I think that's pretty good. Jordan Harris says he thinks that Wingo's out. Could very well be. I was gone for a few days. Maybe the ship has sailed on that. Here's what I'll tell you. In our state right now, we have so many exciting football players. And I think the most entertaining to watch may be Mike Matthews. I had one of Matthews' games last year at the beginning of the season. Was it Parkview Kell that we did that he showed out on? Matthews was amazing, just truly amazing. Like this is a really, really fun guy to watch, a terrifically fun guy to watch. And, if you gave me a wish list of players that Georgia hasn't really been super connected with that I would love for Georgia to win the recruit. Like if I had like some of y'all used to joke that I spoke the George Pickens thing into existence. If I really felt like I had the power to speak something into existence, if I could really magically conjure up a player to Georgia, Matthews would probably be that guy. I just think he's really entertaining. I think he's very entertaining. Very entertaining. Let's see what else is going on. Any new update from Jeff? Is he ready to go yet? Not yet. Okay, we'll keep doing this for a little while here, and see if we can catch up with Jeff here in just a little bit. There's a Tennessee fan in the comment section saying, like one of the ideas that I've had is, like, I think, you know how, like, I guess it's Virginia Tech that did this, where they had like a graveyard of like turf from all the big road wins they'd gotten over the years. I think Virginia Tech was sort of famous for that because they had this like lunch pail thing they'd carry around, and when they win a big road game, they'd cut up some of the turf and they'd put the turf in the lunchbox, which kind of seems like vandalism, but nonetheless, they'd take the turf, they'd put it in the lunchbox, they'd sort of carry that around, and eventually they'd take it back to Blacksburg, and they had this like graveyard or monument park of sorts of all the turf from all the big road wins they've been collecting over the years. I think the Georgia football version of that, and since Georgia's not going to build statues for its best players, I think one of the things that Georgia could do is, I think that Georgia ought to have like a monument park dedicated to all of the excuses that have been used to explain away Georgia wins. You know, Nick Saban's rebuilding year, Nick Saban's injured wide receivers. Like, something about this sort of like a plaque with the quote, with the name of the person who said it, you know, down at the bottom. You know, it was a rebuilding year, Nick Saban, 2021. We had injured wide receivers, Nick Saban, 2021. Tennessee fan, random Tennessee fan. It was raining, you know, November 2022. Ryan Day, Georgia plays too rough, you know, January. December 2022. I think something like that would be kind of a good way to kind of acknowledge the success that Georgia has enjoyed. Some sort of monument park dedicated to the litany of excuses that have existed out there after all of these big Georgia wins as of late. But anyway, kind of an impromptu little comment section there. Shocking to do that in the middle of the show on a Wednesday, but also a little bit shocking to have Jeff Sentell showing up on a Wednesday there as well. So we're going to kind of roll on with that right now. A lot to update as it relates to UGA recruiting. So let's do that with Jeff. We'll also get some thoughts on Dylan Riley. And then before we're done with the program today, a little bit of a look at one of those teams that might be standing in Georgia's way in the SEC and some positive praise that team is getting right now. So let's cover all of that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to have Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, literally on any day, but especially on a day like this, a Wednesday, coming off some time in which I've been kind of away from live shows. A lot has gone on with UGA recruiting, the need to sort of pick up the pieces and sort of figure out all of that. Obviously very important. So, Jeff, thanks for being here. Appreciate your time on a day that's not typically reserved for you in recruiting, although we'll see you on video tonight before the Hedge is presented by Kroger. Hope you are doing well, and we appreciate your time on today's show.
Hey, Brandon, man, great. You know what I'll do since you guys had the impromptu break in your show. I'll share what I was on the phone. I was on the phone with Nair Daniels, pretty big Georgia target, set to commit on July the 4th. And Brandon, dude is 6'8" every bit and 370. And you watch his film, and you're like, man, he moves so well. Like I was telling the young man just a minute ago, I was like, man, if you get down to 330, 340 where the coaches and recruiters want you, he'll look like a Ferrari out there, man. Like he is getting after it. He's down to Final Four. He's got Rutgers, Texas, FSU, and the Dogs, and he's going to make his decision on July 4th. And certainly a guy we need to follow, certainly a name of that Georgia fans really need to know.
Well, I certainly appreciate you meticulously covering all of that. And I guess before you joined us, we also took some time to mention a couple of defensive line commits that Georgia added last week. And I just want to kind of do due diligence on this. You know, speaking of big guys, you're talking about, some good size here, there as well. What did Georgia add to its defensive line room here over the course of the last couple of days?
Yeah, well, first of all, there was a battle there for an in-state prospect, Michael Burrow, that Florida got it there. They had enough of a package, enough of an opportunity there where they took the really talented nose out of Creekside. And Georgia basically had another guy they really wanted, Namandi Ogboko out of North Carolina. Everybody loves North Carolina D tackles. Everybody's going to give. I know Georgia fans will give a little bit more patience to any defensive tackle that Trey Scott likes to begin with. But when they're coming out of North Carolina, Georgia's had a really good track record there in the past. And, he's a guy that hasn't been playing football a whole lot. He's been a basketball player, one of those guys. And, Brandon, the name that's fresh on my mind is Quintavious Johnson Jr.
Yeah.
Because I had to go see him for myself. A lot of reports have him at like 240, 235. Folks that really know his story know that he used to be a quarterback. But, Brandon, I had to go see it for myself. And 6'5", 256, and I really think the Dogs got one there. I know superficially a lot of folks look at the rankings, Brandon, but he could go play quarterback right now in a game if he needed to. He tore up the Georgia Tech 7-on-7 this summer, going 13 out of 16 for 6 touchdowns, and Tech even asked about him as a quarterback. But this is a guy you want to look like. And Brandon, sometimes it seems unfair that the Dogs can go get a guy when they have so many NFL bodies and, names like Justin Green and Williams Winery and Justin Scott and all the household names that they're tracking. And then they go find a guy at Mays High School, 6'5", 256. Brandon, he can still throw a football 60 yards. And he looks like a pure athlete, like not even a biscuit of body fat on his body. We have some video of that up on DawgNation.com, and you'll hear more from him tonight. But I really think with Quintavious Johnson Jr., that's a guy. You give him 2-3 years of development, you get him at that Georgia training table, and you get him developing against the Georgia offensive lines of the future, and the Dogs will really have something there, Brandon. It's an easy comparison to look at that guy and compare him to, like, the most impressive defensive line bodies Georgia has ever recruited, guys like Jermaine Johnson, and he really could play anything from a 4-eye out there to a 9 at Georgia, and I think the Dogs really caught lightning in a bottle with that guy.
I'll also say this, and this has nothing to do with how good of a football player he is, but for my money, the program that he plays for right now, Mays, best helmets in high school football, I believe. The Mays helmets are awesome.
Definitely like that powder blue. Got that color scheme going great.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very sharp look. So it's been busy June official visits, now kind of leading into a period moving towards July where I think a lot of Georgia fans are on guard for a lot of commitments. There's potentially an announcement on Friday that's got a lot of Georgia fans' attention here, but also some more kind of, blooms coming on the roses of some of the visits that have been taking place here a little bit there as well. So kind of give me that snapshot of sort of what you think is next here for Georgia recruiting. Decisions worth following, timelines that are starting to come to an end here. What can we expect to see kind of happen in July or as we move towards July based on what we've all been observing here during June?
I think this is like what we've determined, Brandon, is like recruiting and evaluation season. Well, evaluation season now for Georgia is like January to May. And then recruiting season is really June when all the officials come in. And July is basically commitment season for the Dogs. That's when they want to get up a lot of the hay in the barn. And it sounds crazy with 21 public commitments. I don't think the Dogs have room for maybe 8 or 9 more. They might get 3 or 4 this month at the minimum, Brandon, with a lot of names about to pop. And I think the biggest thing is Georgia's going to know where its offensive line room is. Stacey Searles is trying to get a lot like Todd Hartley and have all his homework done by the time fall practice rolls around. And there are 3 names. We mentioned Nair Daniels on July 4th. You've got, Michael Ooney, who just took his official visit to Georgia this weekend. You mentioned him. He's set to make his decision on June the 30th. There's Marquez, Big Kez Easley on July the 8th. Who, Brandon, if he does end up becoming a Dog, you'd love that because he drops the top 3 that doesn't include the Dogs in there.
Sure.
And then maybe if it's the Dogs, they come out of the blue like somebody from your favorite pro wrestling memories of a guy coming into the ring, running down the alley from backstage. There's a lot of work left to do on the offensive line class. Georgia has been known, some of the reporting we've uncovered, they currently have 2 commitments. There's 1 silent. There's names like Daniel Calhoun. Could he pop in July? There's names like KJ Bolden. I think that's the one everybody's looking at right now, probably the biggest target with some strong Georgia ties that could commit this summer. Those are kind of the names everybody wants to see what's happening. And really the other major storyline for June, Brandon, is you see two things. One, you see a lot of commitments ready to come. I think Carter Nelson's coming today, leaning towards Nebraska there, the talented tight end. You've got C.J. Jackson, a talented edge out of Tucker, who just committed to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's doing some good work here. But the other thing is Georgia's playing defense on a lot of its commitment. I know it makes folks nervous to see K.J. Bolden and Peyton Woodyard and Ellis Robinson IV all posing for pictures together in Tuscaloosa, much less trips to Ohio State for Bolden and Woodyard as well. I think that's maybe a lot of what Georgia's doing with its number one class. Potentially could be the best secondary Kirby Smart will ever have come 2025, come 2026. But right now, a lot of Georgia's number one ranked class, 21 guys in the fold, they're trying to have to kind of play defense and hunker down to make sure those solid commitments remain solid.
So I guess that leads us into a K.J. Bolden discussion here for a moment where, we saw him take the visit to Ohio State. There's obviously a family tie there. We knew he had the Alabama visit, up and coming there. I mean, how much should Georgia fans, you get the impression that some fans feel pretty confident he still ends up in the Georgia class. How justified is that confidence? Or if you're a Georgia fan who kind of worries about, another one of these sort of Buford prospects slipping away, and by the way, we'll get to Dylan Raiola's role and all this in a moment. But if you're that Georgia fan who takes the more, negative bent on this of, oh, here you go again, another one of these Buford guys getting away, like how justified is a viewpoint on that? Like, where do things stand with K.J. Bolden, the 5-star from Buford here at the moment?
Good question, Brandon. I think, and I know folks want to view this a certain way, but remember how we always say, let's stick to our checkdowns, let's stick to our keys. And Brandon, you got to fundamentally look at all those visits to Georgia. I believe that number's up to 15 now. And if Ohio State can do it on 4 or 5 visits, if Alabama can do it on 4 or 5 visits, then Georgia really wasn't going to be a place for K.J. Bolden anyway. I think with KJ, there's a long-term 2 or 3 year connection to Georgia. It's one of those recruits that Kirby Smart has personally recruited in his class. Lots of things, lots of reasons why he would love Georgia. I just really think with KJ, that's a guy that fits Georgia really well. I don't know if you saw this while you were basking in some Caribbean sun, Brandon, but I like the Instagram story post from Malachi Starks on that picture of Ellis Robinson, Peyton Woodyard, and K.J. Bolden that were in Tuscaloosa in the Alabama attire. And he put a dog emoji over the heads of all 3 of those guys. And, Malachi and K.J. would be a scary secondary for Georgia, the range, the speed, the athleticism. And you got to just look at Georgia and think about those 14, 15 visits. The guy keeps coming back for a reason, and that's why I think Georgia has really built a solid foundation. And these visits are supposed to be important, and these visits are supposed to make recruits think. And, heck, maybe KJ even takes an official visit to Auburn down the road if he commits in July. But I got to think that the Dogs have done all they can there with KJ Bolden, and he's liked Georgia a lot for a very long time.
So I know we heard some thoughts from you last week on the move of Dylan Raiola. This was not unanticipated. You and I even talked about this on our show 3 weeks ago or something like that. I mean, this has been kind of out there for a while, that he very likely would end up at Buford. It became official right before I left to go on my Royal Caribbean cruise vacation this past weekend. But you and I talk about this here for a moment. From my perspective, Jeff, there's very little downside to this. And, the one thing that I'm going to stand on the table about is I want football players to play. I don't want guys – because if it seems like right now for a lot of reasons – it's become a little bit more in vogue for a football player to not play high school football, not play high school football. We see reclassifications and things like that. We see going back to the pandemic, we had opt-outs. We've had more examples the last couple of years of elite football players just not playing the end of their high school football career, and I just don't think that's a good thing, Jeff. The idea that Dylan Raiola was facing the potential of missing 5 games in his senior season out in Arizona because of the rules in place in that state for transfers and whatnot, the fact that he chose voluntarily to enter into a more competitive situation here in Georgia where he's going to be battling against good players at practice every day, but also battling against great teams on Friday nights. Jeff, I feel like we get a chance to learn more about Raiola. I think Raiola gets a chance to learn more about himself. I just think from an entertainment standpoint, it's a no-brainer. from a preparation standpoint, this obviously, I believe, aids him. I said yesterday, I believe the difference between Arizona high school football and Georgia high school football is wider than the gap in perception between the SEC and the Pac-12. That it's just to use a Jim Ross phrase here, it's just an example of business picking up a very, very different weight class that Dylan Raiola has entered into, and I don't see any downside about any of it. What is your personal thought on Dylan Raiola now being in the state of Georgia?
Yeah, Brandon, that's a lot of good stuff there you said. My fundamental thing is I guess I'm old school in a lot of ways, but not in this way, because the big narrative out there folks want to point out is he's been to so many schools in so many years. And I don't even know if you can really count Pinnacle because he was only there for 3 or 4 months. He never participated on the team. He never started a game. And every move he's made has been in the benefit of playing. There's no potential about it, Brandon. I have solid, hard reporting information that he was going to catch a 5-game suspension. The hardship appeal that they were going to go through wasn't really going to hold water, so he was not going to play 5 games. So the most important thing to do, like you said, is to play and is to develop. And for him, playing Georgia high school football, Buford High, does not get any tougher than that, does not get any better than that. It's going to make him better. He wants to be at every Georgia home game. It's going to make it easier to do that without catching time zones and red eyes. And he also wants to be there. This is not a move just for six weeks or 6 months for Dylan Raiola and his family. He's got a younger brother, Dayton, that's a 2026 quarterback. He wants to develop. The family wants to see Dylan play at Georgia. And the way you get better playing football is you play against the best competition you can face. That's one of the core principles of Georgia that they sell to recruits. And I get it how people will say so many schools in so many years, but this is not a guy chasing anything or fighting anything. All of his moves make sense from a family development standpoint. Man, the first move was because of COVID. He wanted to play football, and he wanted to play football under the guise and training of a former NFL QB in John Kitna. His sister was actually at TCU for her freshman year at TCU in volleyball. They wanted to be around family. The second move is they wanted to come back to Arizona to be around family. These moves, they're all making Dylan Raiola better, and from a Georgia fan's perspective, they're all making Georgia better because Dylan Raiola will be more battle-tested and ready to play at Georgia when he enrolls in January. He'll be able to recruit more for the class on a whim if a 5-star receiver comes in. Dylan Raiola can make it easy. I think it's 1 hour and 4 minutes away from his door to the doors of Butts-Mehre and the Payne Hall, the House of Payne. So a lot of win-wins, man, everywhere you look at it.
Let me do 2 quick things on this, then we'll let you go here today. And you mentioned the stuff that Raiola can do from a recruiting standpoint. I'll finish with that. Prior to that, though, expectations for him as a player, because I think for some Georgia fans, they hear number 1 player in the country, 5-star quarterback. He's going to come into Georgia, and I think a lot of folks are going to expect that he's just going to just light the entire state on fire. But I would caution against that, and I don't have any reason to believe that Raiola is any less of a prospect than he's been touted to be. You have seen him with your own eyes. You can certainly attest to that. But, Jeff, this is not going to be an easy slate of action for him. This is a Buford team in 7A a year ago that did not win the state championship, didn't even advance, past the second round, lost to a Walton, obviously. That this is a real challenge for him. And we're going to see plenty of great moments from Raiola here in Georgia, I expect, because he is, I believe, a great prospect. But if typical form holds, even 5-stars struggle against Georgia competition at times. My guess is we probably see some of that too. So help me set realistic expectations for what it's going to look like watching Dylan play against talent here in this state.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to call this a level set portion of the show, a level set Wednesday, if you will. Folks, you got to remember this. The recruiting sites don't tell you this. The rankings don't scream this. But the first pass that Dylan Raiola ever threw in a game was a JV game in the 9th grade. He has 2 seasons of varsity football under his belt at the game's hardest position. And I think what this does, another level set, folks, we got to stop looking at 5-stars thinking they're going to come in and they're going to elevate, they're going to enhance, they're going to be the reason why the Dogs win. That's a narrative that's about 3 or 4 years old. 5-stars are no longer supposed to play at Georgia. If 5-stars start right away and set the world on fire, then they might be college football All-American, college football Hall of Fame potential, because the Dogs are so deep with bigger, faster, stronger, more well-versed in the scheme players that these 5-stars aren't supposed to play. I think this experiment or this move with him in Georgia, I think if this really accelerates his opportunity to play early, because the speed of the game is probably 2 clicks faster in Georgia than it is in Arizona. It's definitely 2 clicks faster at Buford High School with that national schedule they'll face and that tough Gwinnett County schedule they'll face. It's going to baptize him in what he's going to need to do and show to be able to play early at Georgia. And let's face it, I think I've said this on your program a lot. The first year for a quarterback at Georgia is psychological warfare. Those players, that scheme, that structure, the speed at which the Dogs practice at and perform at, the mandates that are there on the quarterback chair, the quarterback position, it's supposed to break you. We've seen struggles from guys like Brock Vandegrift, struggles from Carson Beck, struggles from a lot of guys, Jacob Eason, Jake Fromm, where there's a lot there to overcome. And Georgia now has its healthiest quarterback room it's ever had. And for Dylan Raiola to come in and expect to start grabbing first-team snaps, I think that's not plausible, especially his first year, considering, again, this is a guy that's rated the number 1 quarterback prospect in the country, Brandon. The word is prospect. That prospect means what he's going to look like for the NFL draft in 3 years. It's not the number 1 quarterback thrower right now, the number 1 quarterback player of the position right now. While Raiola is very close to the top of the food chain in those marks, I think he's got a lot of upside to get to. He's got that pro body. He's got that pro arm. And I think practicing and playing against Georgia, here's a hot take for you, Brandon. I think Dylan Raiola needs Georgia, that environment, that development, that crucible, that melting pot, as much as anything is Georgia needing him to take big snaps for the Dogs in 25 and 26. I think the road to being a first-round draft pick, the road to being a number 1 overall draft pick, is through practicing and competing and grinding against that defense full of future first-rounders for 3 or 4 years. And that's the best chance for Dylan Raiola's development as a quarterback prospect.
All right, very quick, because we've kept you long here, and we appreciate your time on a Wednesday. How about the impact that Dylan can make on recruiting? Because obviously you pay attention to guys like K.J. Bolden or Edric Houston as part of the class of 2024, but there are also plenty of guys in the 2025 and 2026 classes at Buford that have offers from Georgia or just a chance to rub elbows with, other guys just around the state, in that Gwinnett County area in particular, that he'll just see more frequently now because of the fact that he is in this state. What kind of impact do you think that Raiola's presence here in Georgia has on UGA recruiting in this and future classes?
So here's another one, Brandon, another good take. I think a lot of folks looked at Raiola and they thought that automatically means 1 or 2 quarterbacks are connected to him, and 1 or 2 wide receivers, are connected to him, and they're going to go play for Georgia now. It's going to be a 3-foot punt. Hasn't been the case, whether it's NIL, whether it's playing time, whether it's, something else for personal 5-star receiver preference. I think what it does, to be clear, is it gives Georgia credentials and chops. And what I mean by that, with the number 1 quarterback, with an NFL first-round draft pick prospect, that means Georgia's going to throw the ball. That means Georgia's going to put the ball in Dylan Raiola's hands a lot to make the thing go. And that's going to certify the passing game as a real strength for Georgia for years to come. I think that's important. I think, Georgia's going to win. Everybody knows Georgia's going to win. And there's always going to be that defensive tweak or that defensive DNA of the program. All the defensive players I talk to still say they still love the fact that the defensive coordinator background is in Kirby Smart's blood, and that's why they want to come play for him. But now, with a future first-rounder at quarterback, I think it balances out the appeal to a lot of recruits, a lot of tight ends, a lot of offensive linemen want to block for Raiola, protect Raiola. I think that matters the most here, is it gives Georgia credentials, it gives it chops to know that the Dogs are going to be bona fide throwing the ball as well, along with everything else that they do very well.
Jeff, great stuff. I appreciate it. Fun to talk to you on a Wednesday. Great to get this information. I know tonight, Before the Edge is presented by Kroger. You've got a lot more, including previewing, some preview announcements for some offensive line commits, potential commits, and things like that. You've got it all covered for us there at DawgNation. We appreciate that. We'll watch you tonight on Before the Hedges and talk to you again here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management very soon.
Hey, Brandon, glad to have you back, buddy. Happy Wednesday.
You too, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, fun to get that information from Jeff, and obviously fun to kind of watch where all this goes from here because, as we said, June busy because of all the official visits. July, its own kind of busy. We're not quite to July yet, but July, its own kind of busy where a lot of guys want to get those announcements squared away. The entire recruiting calendar just sort of changed where, everything is kind of moved up where guys want to do their deliberations during the summer. In many cases, get it kind of settled before they go into their senior year. There are a few guys who obviously want to take it all the way to the end of the process because, they want every, possible advantage coming their way, for making that decision. But obviously a lot of that action going to be taking place here right now. And it's also fun to think about the chances of watch some of these guys playing, whether it be, a guy like Raiola now in the state or just wherever, watching players play and seeing some of the evidence of why it is that a lot of these recruits have gotten the attention from guys like Jeff Sentell. That's what makes the fall time of year fun for the high school football part of all this. So really good stuff with Jeff Sentell on all of that. Now, as that said, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. I know that Jeff Sentell is much like me in one very important respect. Jeff loves taking a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. He's taken a great handful of those. I was on board Independence of the Seas this past weekend, and it just reminds me of all the fun we had back in April when our DawgNation cruise also took place on Independence of the Sea. But as many of you know, we made this announcement just prior to me leaving and been kind of hyping this up here a little bit. In April of 2024, the DawgNation cruise gets bigger and better than it's ever been before. We're going to be on board Allure of the Seas. And this is an amazing thing. For the very first time ever, Royal Caribbean at Port Canaveral, which is the port that's probably closest to us here, easy to drive to, just down the road from Orlando. You're basically there. You can get in the car and get there pretty easy from where I'm sitting here in the Atlanta area. And for the first time ever, out of Port Canaveral, Royal Caribbean is going to be offering these shorter sailings, the 3 and the 4 night sailings, the kind of thing that's convenient if you've got a lot going on and kind of busy. For the first time ever, those who are taking these 3 and 4 night sailings get a chance to take advantage of all the stuff that you can do on board an Oasis class ship, largest class of ships at sea right now. And Allure of the Seas is going to be the ship that we're on for our DawgNation cruise coming up in April. Y'all, I'm not kidding when I say bigger and better than it's ever been before. And I've been amazed. It really has been amazing. The response that we've had to the DawgNation cruise thus far, which thrills me because it means the word of mouth that we've participated in is working. The event we put on, the word of mouth that people have had about that, it's just gratifying to know that people are enjoying it as much as I thought that they would, because our bookings for this already have just been enormous. And it's great to see. We have limited space because the ships are selling out. This day and age, all of these Royal Caribbean ships are basically selling out for every single sailing. So this is one of those things where you have, kind of a limited block of rooms that we can get for our people. And then after that, it's just essentially gone. So it is not too early to start thinking about cruise travel next spring, April of 2024. The DawgNation cruise on board Allure of the Seas, also going to Perfect Day Coco Cay and Nassau in the Bahamas. Special DawgNation events, including some brand new DawgNation events, which, in keeping with the theme, also expect to be bigger and better than they've ever been before. So Jessica Slater's our travel agent. She helps us with this. You can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also visit royaldogs.com to find out more about this today there as well. That's the website that she's put together, royaldogs.com. Make sure you check that out. You can find out all the information you need to know about the DawgNation cruise taking place April of 2024. All right, with that said, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I want to take a minute to mention, we started the show today by talking about the idea that Michigan wants to beat Georgia. That's been kind of their plan here. And as I said at the time, that's one of those things where if you're a Georgia fan, I think you just sort of have to get a little bit expecting of that teams are going to want to set their sights on Georgia, and teams want to measure themselves in comparison to Georgia. The way at one point in time they may have wanted to measure themselves against someone else, there is no doubt who the class of college football is right now. And so if you're a Georgia fan, and I'm sure we'll spend plenty of time talking about this in the future, but if you're a Georgia fan, you're also left to wonder, okay, well, of those potential contenders, of those teams that want to consider themselves threats to the dominance that Georgia's shown, who is worthy of kind of taking a second look at? One of the teams I've talked about a good bit here over the course of this offseason is LSU. And I think the narrative arc of LSU has been a little bit interesting in that if you want to go back to the early part of the calendar year, I don't think LSU was properly considered Now, that has changed somewhat in the last few months to the point where our buddy Connor Riley told us, I guess it was last week, that he thought that LSU was getting too much attention. Whether that's true now or not, I don't know. But I think that two things have happened over the course of the last few months to kind of bring LSU more to the forefront than they otherwise would have been. One of those things is the chief competition that LSU faced in the SEC West, Alabama. I think there's been a vantage point looking in on Alabama where their spring practice, well, I don't know that it was all that stellar. Certainly did not resolve the quarterback situation really at all. You bring in Tyler Buckner, who may have been the third-string guy at Notre Dame, to compete with Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson. It seems like now the whispers and the chatter coming out of Tuscaloosa is the guy, Jalen Milroe, who Alabama fans saw a year ago and were underwhelmed by, that he may be the starting quarterback here this year. And so I think that's caused some people to think that they were kind of naturally anticipating an Alabama bounce back after 2 losses a season ago. Well, if the quarterback situation isn't resolved any more than that, and it's clearly a downgrade from where Bryce Young would have had this program playing the last couple of years, in that case, there was sort of a reconsidering of LSU because of that. The other thing that has gone on with LSU is I think people are also looking to see what LSU has added in the transfer portal. I saw a list at CBSSports.com the other day of the units in the country most likely to kind of see a big level of improvement here this season. And one of the units that got mentioned was the LSU defense. And the writer of the piece, one of the things that he noted was that LSU is bringing in 14 transfers for the upcoming season, which is, Georgia brings in far less than that, but 14 is not out of line in comparison to what some other programs are bringing in. But in LSU's case, they're bringing 11 of these 14 players on defense. And 10 of those are like either defensive linemen or secondary type guys. So pretty clearly the transfer portal here being used to boost LSU's overall defensive depth. That's kind of the plan here. That's kind of the goal here. They're looking to boost that. Now, we have certainly seen some evidence the last couple of years that if you want to completely change the fortunes of your program, the transfer portal may not be the best overall path to do that. But if you're looking to sort of add depth, provide a little bit of a boost in terms of the total number of capable players you have in your roster, the transfer portal might not be a bad, kind of method on that. So overall, I'm not going to wildly change my opinion of any team in the base of the transfer portal, but a team in LSU that was already pretty good a year ago, adding more veteran, seasoned players, capable bodies into its defense, that may be a good thing. The best thing for LSU, though, is the return of a guy like Mason Smith, defensive lineman who dealt with injury, him being back fully healthy. That may be the kind of thing that probably improves the fortunes of LSU more than anything else. But just pay attention to this. LSU team that's already pretty good, very active in the transfer portal there as well. We typically see big boosts at times from second-year coaches. That's what Brian Kelly is. I told you last week, I believe that LSU will be a playoff team. I believe they'll join Georgia as the second team in the SEC to make this year's college football playoff. And I think for a while, folks were a little slow to recognize that, but they seem to be kind of coming around on that a little bit now, which I do believe is the correct opinion. Also, on a very different note, incredibly sad news, Ryan Mallett, who many of you will remember as a former Arkansas quarterback, had kind of a nice game against Georgia, I guess going back to, 2010, I guess that would have been. Very athletic, tall guy, ran very well, just a really sharp-looking dude at the quarterback position. Horrible news here, passed away. Only 35 years old. I guess the reports are that he drowned. Incredibly sad. And I saw this last night. Some of y'all kind of the same way. You're like going around, you're sort of doing whatever, and you sort of see this news, and gosh, just way too young for a guy that, we're not Arkansas fans here, but we watch SEC football, every single Saturday, and all these players that play in this league, you feel a certain kinship with them just because you spend so much time watching them on TV. Ryan's not a guy that I knew personally, but boy, you felt like you did as much as you watch these guys play on television, and just incredibly sad, just gone way too soon. A little bit of a punch in the gut last night to see that story come across. I'm sure many of you had the same reaction. So prayers to the Arkansas football family, obviously Mallett's family in particular here. Just no easy way to say it other than just incredibly sad news. And so we'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on Wednesdays, awkward transition here, but here on Wednesdays, we also love to give a shout out to our friends at the Finnish Long Drink there as well. And obviously we're moving towards a 4th of July weekend type thing. Everybody having fun, everybody getting ready to have the cookouts and all the fun stuff that goes along with that. And as one of our Golden Shoes mentioned yesterday, when you're doing all of that, when you're grilling out the steaks, when you're out, hanging by the pool, whatever you got going on, a nice ice cold cooler full of that finished long drink is a great way to enjoy all of that. In fact, if you go to thelongdrink.com, here's what you can find. The 4 different varieties of the finished long drink. The cranberry, the long drink strong, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. A lot of you want to look good here during this bathing suit time of the year. Me, I'm sort of okay with how I am. But some of you want to be, sharp and svelte, and I get all that. If you want to do that, the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, that's a great way to do all of that. I like the traditional. It's the blue can. It's got the grapefruit flavor. It's the gin kick. It's just kind of, to me, I'm sort of the classic flavor type guy. And to me, for whatever reason, the grapefruit and gin combination there, the finished long drink, is to me the classic flavor. And I'm generally speaking, I'm going to lean classic flavor. And to me, the long drink traditional, that's kind of the classic flavor there with the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. If you like mixed drinks, this is a mixed drink you don't have to mix yourself. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail right there in the can. So go to thelongdrink.com, find out where you can pick some up. Literally, it's just about everywhere now. So, when we first started talking about the long drink a couple of years ago, I think some folks were not quite so sure what it was or not quite so sure how to find it. Well, now, rarely do I go anywhere seemingly that doesn't have the finished long drink, especially golf courses and bars in my area. It's very easy to find, very fun to drink, great to enjoy this time of year. So make sure you check out the finished long drink today. Now, speaking of enjoying some fun time outside, which we like to do this time of year, I had a chance to do that last night. In fact, I had a chance to do that with a good friend of Dog Nation's there as well. Our buddy Chase from 7-6 Apparel. Them, the great T-shirts they make that celebrate all kinds of cool things happening around sports in the state of Georgia. Well, Chase and his family joined us last night, a couple of the Dog Nation folks on hand, for a fun night with the Atlanta Braves. Let me show you this picture here on the screen. Good to see Chase decked out in his Braves gear. Me there as well. Appreciate our friends, our corporate friends who had a chance to be a part of that with us there last night there too. So fun night with the Atlanta Braves, and what a show this Braves team is putting on right now. 5 more home runs last night. Defensive web gym type stuff all over the place. So fun night with the folks from 7-6 Apparel. Dog Nation there at the Atlanta Braves game last night. So we'll give a golden shoe all around there on that. Now, lousy stinking Gators. They don't want to talk about baseball right now because they just got embarrassed in the finale of the College World Series. So we'll talk about football instead. How about 122 days from right now? Georgia also kicking them around in football here, too. We believe that's going to happen. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here tomorrow. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. I cannot believe how hot it has been lately. It's like for a while it seemed like real summer was slow to get here. Do y'all sort of feel like that was true? Maybe it's only me that felt that way. But it sort of seems like real summer was kind of slow to get here for a while. Well, folks, it is here now. It is here, and it is hot, and it is absolutely just oppressive heat, if you will. R.S. Andrews is your defense against that. A nice, cool, comfortable house. That's what R.S. Andrews can provide to you. And then get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh spec. So trust them on all of that today. All right, so earlier we did some comments, and one of our commenters said, you better not take this away from the regular cool down time. So we're going to try not to do that, but I'm also going to try to keep our good friend Kaylee Mansell, who's producing today, I'm going to try to prevent her from having to stay here all day there as well. So we will just sort of see how it goes. Although I guess Kaylee's going to be here all day anyway because our buddy Jeff Sentell is coming in a few minutes too. So.
And I hear your comments. I will make sure Jeff goes longer on the live
there you
studio
go. Yeah.
audience.
Yeah, you forced Jeff to do that. Everybody needs to be more – people need to be more like me just in general. But everybody needs to be more like me and more interactive with the live shows. There you go. We're kind of in a relaxed mood today, so hopefully everybody's feeling good today. All right, let's see how it's going. Paul Moon, yeah, that was him that asked for the same amount of time. Fred Gunn said, let's have a full hour of the cool down. It is hot. I can't do a full hour, but we'll do a few minutes here. Army Dog Charlie says Jeff can't work the chats like me. Listen, Jeff can do anything that he sets his mind to. There's no doubt about that. Jonathan Aaron says, am I going to go to media days? I don't know. Let me tell you what my thought process is. Because, I don't get in trouble at work a lot. Like every now and then I'll, kind of, get sent to the principal's office for whatever reason. But like one of the things I'm kind of getting a little bit of grief for right now from my boss is he told me like yesterday I just need to make up my mind one way or another. So let me tell you what my two thoughts are about this. And y'all tell me. I'd be curious to know. So if I go to SEC Media Days, that means the show is going to feel a little bit different. It's just never quite the same show when we're on the road. And for a couple of days, maybe that's not such a big deal. Maybe it'd be more fun to have some of the live access stuff that we can get kind of, on the scene there. So for maybe a couple of days, it's just not that big of a deal to have the show feel a little bit different. Because on the one hand, I would like to be there. It's not just like the main coaches and players, but there's also access to, other people that you could maybe have, and that could be fun for the show. So there is something, I think, good for the broadcast component of all this to be there on the scene, but the show would feel a little bit different. So y'all tell me, if you had the choice, for those of you that care, would you rather me just sort of sit here and have the show as normal and let the other guys take care of and gals take care of the SEC Media Day stuff? Or would you rather me be there, be in person for at least a portion of it? I probably would not go for all, was it 3 days now? 9 days. There's 100 teams in the SEC pretty soon. I would probably not go for the entirety of the event one way or another, but would you rather me be there? Would you let me stay here? Y'all tell me. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that. Paul Moon says, I'm not sure to process Jeff's take on KJ Bolden. Yeah, I think that sometimes Jeff is hard to read on stuff like this. I do. I do. Sometimes it's a little hard to read on stuff like that. Jonathan Aaron says, don't forget to take my SUV. That way I have extra room when I see Jimbo fish the big bag of money. Well, I can tell you this, that my family does have a small SUV, but if you think my wife lets me drive that, you are crazy. You are crazy. My wife ain't let me drive that SUV very much. She commandeers that for herself. Nature Gator in here giving me a hard time. I probably deserve that. Crow King 123 says the KJ Bolden situation is that his heart wants Georgia, but he has a Buford tradition to uphold, which he references by saying he's not going to go to Georgia. It's kind of a lot of Georgia fans do feel that way. It's kind of funny. Howard Eubank says Michigan does not have the heart or the work ethic to beat the Dogs. They want to, but they can't. Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I don't think that Michigan could even come close to beating Georgia. I just don't think, I don't think you beat Georgia by trying to be Georgia light, and that's kind of what Michigan is, right? They're gonna be tough on the lines of scrimmage. They're gonna have pretty good quarterback play. They're gonna be great on defense. Their version of that, they're like a sugar-free version of Georgia. They're like a 0-calorie version of Georgia, and that's not how you beat Georgia. You don't do that. So I don't give Michigan much of a chance to beat Georgia. But as I said before, I don't have any beef with them kind of calling out Georgia. It's like, I consider myself a little bit of an aspirational person. I aspire to things. And I don't have a problem, with somebody aspiring to greatness. Even if you fall short of that, there's nothing wrong with being aspirational in life, I don't believe. Frank Patterson says if you didn't go to Media Day last year, then don't go this year. But I did go for a portion of Media Day a year ago, but it was also in Atlanta, so I'm not sure that counts or not. T-Mart42 says Jim Harbaugh is the human equivalent of aspartame, which is kind of funny. Taylor Russell says it's also a compliment that Michigan says what it says. I kind of feel that way too, Taylor. I do. To me, it's better than like what Kirk Herbstreit did, which is sort of pretend that Alabama somehow is still the top dog in all of college football. I'll take the Michigan, referencing of Georgia over that any day of the week. Rhodey Williams says Kirby's going to score 70 on Michigan. We make it to the national title. Well, listen, he may very well do that anyway. I mean, they scored 65 a year ago. But I don't believe this is bulletin board material. I mean, do y'all agree with me on this? I don't think this is bulletin board material. Like, saying you want to beat Georgia that's what you should be saying, right? And I'll actually take this over. Let's say that Brian Kelly at SEC Media Days says, he's asked, last year you got a chance to face Georgia in the SEC Championship. You came up short there in that game, had a hard time, keeping up with them in the first half, ended up losing the game by 20 points, whatever you lost. What are you going to do to close the gap with Georgia? So if you ask a question like that to a coach like Brian Kelly, very frequently what he might say is, a lot of coaches would say is, well, we're not really worried about Georgia right now. We're worried about ourselves, and we're going to be the best version of ourselves, and we feel like we have a chance to beat whoever we play. That's kind of what coaches would say in a situation like that. But that's not how people talk, right? I mean, that's not how human beings actually talk, and that's not how a coach would talk behind the scenes there as well. I mean, you better believe that there are certain things that you have to do if you want to beat the very best team in college football. In other words, what you do to beat Iowa isn't the same thing you do to beat Georgia. And it's one thing to sort of, work on yourself and be the best you can be, and that may get you past 80 to 90% of the teams that you play. But there's a handful of teams you got to be at your absolute best to be able to beat. And to me, Jim Harbaugh's, thing here is a little bit more honest, authentic, and genuine than some other coaches who might kind of avoid their true stepping stone type games. Like I'll give you an example. We've talked a lot of high school football today. I'll give you an example of this there too. I talked to high school coaches during the week, and there are a couple of them that'll just be flat out honest, because in Georgia, your region games matter so much more than anything else. Like, your pre-region schedule, a lot of those are like really big games, good teams matching up with each other. But you could lose that game 100-0, and it doesn't hurt you at all. It's like if so-and-so team from this classification plays so-and-so team from this classification, that's kind of just for fun. And teams like to play those really tough games because it prepares them for the playoffs. But it's what you do against your region schedule that qualifies you for the playoffs. And so there are a couple of coaches that say, yeah, we work on so-and-so team and so-and-so team and so-and-so team. We work on them every week. And we don't make any bones about this. If we want to be good in the postseason, these games matter way more than anything else. These are our measuring stick type games. Some coaches are willing to be that honest. And in this particular case, Jim Harbaugh is saying, hey, we can roll the ball out there and beat Minnesota just by being Michigan. But just being ourselves isn't quite enough to get it done against Georgia, because the last time we played, Georgia won by, 40 points, whatever. So from that standpoint, I don't think what Jim Harbaugh is doing there rises to the level of being bulletin board material. Joseph Kennedy says, what happens to Jim Harbaugh's satellite camps? It's a really good question. So if you want to go back to early days of DawgNation Daily, like 2016, summer of 2016, we talked about Jim Harbaugh on this show all the time. SEC through type stuff, when he's coming to Georgia for satellite camps, and he got that receiver out of Alabama I thought was pretty good. Got Aubrey Solomon. I thought Solomon was good. We thought, Jim Harbaugh's going to be this factor down here in Georgia, and he's going to do these satellite camps. He's invading the South. He's coming down here and planting his flag. Where'd that go? That completely disappeared, right? Some of this is as simple as, Southern football players got wind of what a Michigan winter felt like. And this ain't for me. So that was a big deal for a while and completely disappeared. Yarnell Culler, I should say, and William Camacho talking about 66 more days to kickoff. Yeah, we're getting close, y'all. Getting close. So the only countdown we really do is our Gator Hater countdown. But when that starts to feel kind of close, you realize, oh my gosh, the season's even closer. So there you go. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. I think I lost my DawgNation comments. I've got 8,000 browsers open. My computer's also been acting weird today. Part of the reason I played the wrong audio clip a little earlier is my computer's just been doing some weird stuff. Bill Russell says I should go to Nashville and show up Paul Feinbaum. Yeah, there you go, Bill. I like the idea of that. I like the idea there as well. Randy Hall thinks that Jeff should try to rival me in fan interaction. There you go. Yeah, y'all call out Jeff. I get called out all the time for various stuff. Y'all call out Jeff. I don't mind doing that, for sure. Hemingway says, bold prediction, RJS going to have a breakout year. I don't think my brain's firing on all cylinders day. Who is RJS? Who am I blanking on there on those initials? Some of you also having fun with the excuses a little earlier. Hemingway wants some DawgNation polos to be for sale. Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get a chance to do that or not. Roseme Jackson. Okay. Roseme Jackson. Yeah, I mean, I think him coming back was a big deal for Georgia. I do. I think him coming back was a very big deal for UGA. I definitely do. Let's see what else. G. Gray says you got to be lucky to beat Bama. It's rare that we lose a game. Boy, it seems like a lot of folks been it seems like a lot of teams have been pretty lucky lately. Then, DMart42 also mentioning Brew McCoy. I think Brew McCoy for Tennessee is going to be an interesting player this year. I mean, I don't mind telling you, I sort of expect the Tennessee offense to be pretty good every single year. And I sort of expect there to be a certain sort of plug-and-play type situation there because, listen, Hendon Hooker was no big deal at all before he came to Tennessee. Being there at Virginia Tech, I mean, Hooker was just a guy. I mean, people knew who he was, but not one person had any thought about Hendon Hooker whatsoever and became a very different type of player playing the Josh Heupel offense the last couple of years. So from that standpoint, doing that with somebody else ought to be pretty easy there as well. And I believe for the most part it kind of will be. But the other thing here is that while Hooker was no real big deal at Virginia Tech before he came to Tennessee, Hooker also blew past Joe Milton in that particular competition. So while Josh Heupel, I believe, is capable of taking an average quarterback and turning him into something pretty potent in his offense, I'm not trying to be overly harsh here, but I think it's debatable whether or not Joe Milton is actually an average quarterback. I think that's actually somewhat debatable. He's had so many chances to become a starting quarterback in college football. It just hasn't happened yet. Now, Vols fans, if they were here, after making excuses about the rain and whatever else, would also say, well, if it ain't Joe Milton, it's going to be Nico Imaleva. And it very well might be. It could be that we sort of see a Joe Milton type thing at the first of the year. By the time Georgia plays Tennessee in November, you may see Nico Imaleva, emerge as a Tennessee quarterback. We're led to believe they're certainly paying him enough that they ought to try to get something for their money. So maybe making him the starting quarterback this year would certainly make some sense. But, while I have my doubts about Tennessee, generally speaking, as kind of a true, consistent championship contender in the SEC or the college football playoff or anything else, I do expect them to be good offensively almost every year, this year included. Paul Moon says he has a feeling the Leach might be a little short on Joe Milton. I think it's probably true. So one of two things is going to be true. Either Joe Milton is going to be just benched, like he has been every other time in his career, or he's going to be this year's version of, say, Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. Because, the one thing that Joe Milton can do, and a lot of y'all know this, Joe Milton can throw it from one side of the state to the other. His arm is wow. I mean, his arm is strong. I mean, he can throw it, from Knoxville to Memphis. So if he does stay the starting quarterback all year long, then these same draft scouts who embarrass themselves by making, hype trains out of Will Levis and things like that, they'll embarrass themselves doing the same thing for Joe Milton this upcoming spring there as well. That is something you can set your watch to. That if Milton does really sort of emerge and maintain his status as Tennessee starting quarterback, then he will be this year's version of the overhyped SEC quarterback come draft time. DMart42 says, aren't Joe Milton and Heupel best friends going back to Heupel at UCF? I think you may be confusing Joe Milton with Mackenzie Milton. Mackenzie Milton was the quarterback at UCF. Joe Milton used to be at Michigan. Memphis Dog says, if Milton throws the football to Memphis, I'll catch it. There you go. Jonathan Aaron also says, what would be more impressive, 2,000-yard receivers this season or 2,000-yard rushers this season? And you have to choose one. All right. So here's my possibly overly simplistic answer. We saw Georgia have 2 years of 1,000-yard rushers. That's happened in 2017, 2018, right? There weren't 2 1,000-yard rushers in 2016 where Sony didn't have 1,000 yards in 2016, I don't think. We've seen 2 years worth of Georgia having multiple 1,000-yard rushers, 2017, 2018. In both those years, Georgia came up short of winning the national championship. Now, 2017, they came as close to winning the title as they could without winning it. So from that standpoint, maybe you could have gotten over the hump there on that. But ultimately, those teams, I think most of would say, probably needed just a little bit more passing attack. Just a little bit more passing attack. So from that standpoint, I would say the team most likely to thrive would be the team with the 2,000-yard rushers over the team with the 2,000-yard rushers, the 2,000-yard receivers over the 2,000-yard rushers. So if I'm forced to answer your question for this particular year, I believe I'd take the 2,000-yard receivers. Now, if you told me right now that Georgia will have a 1,000-yard receiver and a 1,000-yard rusher, my only question for you is, what day will the parade be on? That's the only thing I'd want to know, because I feel like that Georgia has incredibly upgraded its offense over the course of the last couple of years. And I feel like the final frontier of all that is, I do truly believe this, not everybody seems to agree with me, but I truly believe this, is that the final frontier on this is for the passing game to be so good that it also raises the level of the rushing attack there as well, because a lot of times in college football, that's kind of what we see. Clemson's rushing attack really benefited from putting in Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. A guy like Najee Harris became, a very successful running back at Alabama because of the passing attack they had there. And on you go, that we see a lot of teams. The best example of all of this may be Oklahoma back in the Baker Mayfield days, when Rodney Anderson and Trey Sermon became very successful running backs too, once again because defenses were so keyed on stopping that passing attack, that we see a lot of pass-first teams eventually develop very successful rushing attacks as well. So I think what we've seen from Georgia the last couple of years is a little bit of a transition. I told you at one point in time, hey, my only concern about that transition to a team that needs to throw the ball a little bit more, which Georgia probably did need to make that change, but my only concern was you better be careful you don't get stuck in the middle. You don't go from being a running team to try to become a little bit more of a passing team and accidentally get stuck halfway in that transition, and now you're not really throwing the ball and you're not really running the ball. There was some danger. Anytime you go away from what's working pretty well, try to change to something that might work better, you always run the risk of, erosion when you try to do something like that. And so Georgia took on a little bit of risk by trying to transform its offense, and the risk paid off. The transition has worked. Georgia is now a more successful passing team than it used to be. And as it continues to build on its passing success, I believe eventually the running game is going to benefit from that. We may not quite be there yet, but I think Georgia could be heading there. Frank Patterson, who never misses an opportunity to take a jab at the Alabama running back situation, says that Najee Harris did have a better year last year once the Steelers drafted George Pickens. There you go, Frank. I like that. All right. Spencer Clark says LSU keeps getting good wide receivers for some reason, and that's another reason why I kind of said what I said about the LSU defense a moment ago, which is, hey, you kind of know what you're getting from LSU offensively right now, and I still believe they need to find some way to use Garrett Nussmeier in some part of that offensive story this year, but you sort of know what he is. If they do use some of those transfers to kind of bolster their depth on defense, that makes them more dangerous. Memphis Dog says, I can't see LSU losing more than 2 regular season games. If they lose twice in the regular season, that's not a successful campaign. If LSU, because listen, for all I've kind of said about talking up LSU, for this upcoming year, the truth is they did not look good in the Tennessee game a year ago, and the Florida State loss, although that seems a little bit better now because we find out what Florida State was. Man, they were sloppy as could be during that game. So, if LSU loses twice in the regular season this year, then LSU fans will not be happy with Brian Kelly, and Brian Kelly's going to find out what life in the SEC is really like, because Notre Dame fans are not as intense as that. They're just not. And so Brian Kelly's going to try to figure out how much he likes living down south, if that is indeed the case. Although I believe they'll probably be better than that. Taylor Russell says he also lost to the lousy Aggies there as well, which is really just inexcusable. Just inexcusable. Randy Hall mentioned about the idea of Damon Wilson leading the Dogs in sacks. Yeah, I mean, look, in conversations like this, I'm going to always go second-year guy over first-year guy. And I was on with my friends at 960 The Ref this morning, and I sort of mentioned that I think there are a lot of Georgia fans 1 year further removed. I think they've kind of forgotten about Marvin Jones Jr. a little bit. I believe he'll be healthy. So if you said, hey, give me your whatever, I'm going to lean more second year than first year on most of that kind of stuff. Jared Johnson also wants me to go to SEC Media Days. So maybe the people have spoken on this. Kent Holcomb says he witnessed the Golden Pole, Steve Bartkowski, throw from the goal line through the goalpost during warm-ups one day at Atlanta Stadium. That's amazing. He says, I had end zone seats and said, do that again, and he did. Strongest arm I've ever seen witnessed on a quarterback. Kent, that's a really cool story. So I grew up in Atlanta. I never went to a football game at Fulton County Stadium. Like late in the year when I go to a Braves game, you'd see like the lines drawn from like they had a Falcons preseason game or something like that. I never saw a football game at Fulton County Stadium. I have now seen a football game at Turner Field, though, because I did a high school state championship game a couple of years ago. But I never saw a football game at Fulton County Stadium. Wayne Kirkland says, when it comes to having a 1,000-yard rusher, that Georgia does split carries more so than other teams. That's true. But listen, even splitting carries between a couple of backs in 17 and 18, I mean, Georgia had a couple of years, they had like 2,500 yards between two backs. Like it's crazy how good Georgia used to be running the football. Like crazy. All right, let's see what else. All right, we're going to get ready to go. It's getting a little bit late. Keith Fold says balance is the key in just about everything. That's true. I am more successful at that in some areas than in others, it would seem at times. But yes, I do know what you mean by that. Randy Hall says that Josh Hyde may not have been a longtime friend of Joe Milton, but he was a longtime friend of Milton Berle. So there you go on that. Ryan Harris says, my dad used to take me to Braves games at Fulton County Stadium. Yeah. Weird to think that, like I have, my Braves fandom has spanned 3 different stadiums. Like the Braves played in Fulton County all the way through 1996. I went to a million games there. And then, 20-year span at Turner Field. I guess I probably saw more games at Turner Field than I did Fulton County Stadium. But I went to a lot of games at Fulton County Stadium for a long time. But probably saw more games at Turner Field than I did Fulton County Stadium. And, working on trying to get down to Truist Park as much as I can. 3 different stadiums of Braves fan there. All right, we're going to get ready to go for today. Howard Eubanks says, can't wait for fall practice. He's going to be here before you know it. No doubt about that. Also, while we wait, we bide our time during the summer. That means we try to stay cool when we can. Our friends at R.S. Andrews help us do that. So find them online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised. As I told you before, get that AC unit tuned up to factory fresh specs. You may have called some fly-by-night company and said, hey, my air conditioning's not working. Well, the first thing they're going to tell you is, well, you got to replace it. Look, one of these days you probably will, but our friends at R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how you can get some new life out of that old unit. So let them breathe some new life into it. Get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. And more importantly, keep it cool all summer long. rsandrews.com for more on that. Our buddy Dari Payro, no doubt we'll be hearing from him very soon there as well. I'm sure he's got all kinds of thoughts on some early gambling lines and some things like that. So we'll talk to Dari about that, no doubt, very soon here. But for now, we'll say goodbye and talk to you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.